Hello, and welcome to the Biomass Magazine podcast. I am your host, Anna Simet. We are here live from the International Biomass Conference and Expo trade show floor. I am here with Steve Csonka. He is Executive Director of CAFFI. Steve, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Anna, for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. We are so glad to have you here. How about you tell us a little bit about CAFFI to start, your members, and what it is that you do there?
Sure, that's a great place to start because I know we don't have a lot of recognition with this crowd at present. CAFFI is the Commercial Aviation Alternative Fuels Initiative. We're a public-private partnership between the federal government and the aviation industry, represented by the airlines, the aircraft manufacturers, and the airports. And our group was founded in 2006 with the purpose of fostering the development and commercialization of sustainable aviation fuel, which sounds really nice. All we're trying to do is stand up an entirely new industrial sector for the production of synthetic jet fuel. Member-wise, we have about 1,800 affiliates from around the world who are working on SAF and collaborating with us generally. And we get work done through some of our own work teams, but more often than not, collaborating with agencies of the federal government on the development programs that they have announced for SAF. And the most recent activity that drives that is the U.S. SAF Grand Challenge that the government adopted 2 years ago, which is targeting the production of 3 billion gallons of jet fuel by 2030.
So, how about if we go a little bit back to the basics? Since you mentioned our audience might not be familiar with SAF and CAFFI. What is SAF and how is it different than what airlines are using right now?
Yeah, that's a great place to start a discussion. So SAF, it stands for Sustainable Aviation Fuel. And I'll address the last two pieces first, the aviation fuel portion of it. So at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is make a product that's of higher sustainability than continuing to use jet fuel produced from petroleum. And we're after uh, different attributes associated with the sustainable portion, but it's important to stay focused on that jet fuel piece. So everything that we're doing is working on the development of a drop-in fuel. So whether we produce it from ethanol or it comes from woody biomass, at the end of the process, we're still producing a jet fuel. So it requires no changes to distribution infrastructure, airports, or aircraft, no modifications to engines. It's chemically identical to petroleum-based jet fuel. The sustainable portion comes from our definition going back several years on sustainability. It's delivering on environmental, social, and economic improvements that make a process sustainable into the future. And you can't just focus on one of those elements like a lot of folks do on the environmental aspects. It has to be acceptable from multiple aspects. And in fact, the UN has come up with a sustainable development framework that includes, I don't know now, I think 17 or 18 different categories of things that need to be looked at with respect to sustainable products and whether they're meeting different hurdle criteria to ensure that they truly are sustainable. So at the end of the day, what jet fuel is a set of pure hydrocarbons that range from C7 to C17 and include iso, normal, and cycloparaffins. This is your chemistry lesson for the day, as well as aromatic content. It's that box of molecules that comprise jet fuel. And that's all we're doing is instead of reaching into the ground and pulling out petroleum and separating out that group of hydrocarbons and putting them into a petroleum-based jet fuel, we're trying to source those same hydrocarbons or precursors to those hydrocarbons from renewable resources primarily. And I say renewable, I use that term loosely because yes, it's the things that nature hands us in terms of lipid content and fats, oils, and greases. It's sugars and starches. And it comes in the form of lignocellulose, which is the primary material in plants. But we're also seeing more and more focus on being able to capture hydrocarbons from waste streams and circular economy byproduct streams. Like every food production process typically has some waste hydrocarbons that come out of it. So, can we capture those economically and convert them into that box of molecules that we know and love for jet fuel?
Right. Very well explained. So tell us about what CAFFI's biggest focus is right now. I would imagine the SAF Grand Challenge is one of them that it's probably exactly that, a massive challenge.
Yes, it clearly is a massive challenge. It's quite I was going to say wonderful. I don't know what the appropriate terminology is. It's invigorating, maybe,
Mhm.
to have the combined resources of several agencies within the federal government joining us on this quest. And, so they're bringing lots of focus, lots of economics, foundational support, policy, et cetera, along with that. So, um, I'm looking at the SAF Grand Challenge as primarily the opportunity, right? It's the horse that we're going to have to ride for several years to really help us deliver on our goals. The thing that's unique about the SAF Grand Challenge is it's an across the board governmental approach. But guess what? The government is not making our jet fuel,
Right.
right? They're just trying to enable industry to do that. So our challenges clearly come back to some of the fundamentals. Can I go through these different processes to take what looks like somebody else's waste product and transform that into a hydrocarbon molecule in the jet fuel range at a reasonable price point? That's our key challenge today. We know that we can do it from a chemical engineering perspective, chemistry perspective, but today the price is at least 2 to 3 times more expensive than continuing to buy petroleum-based jet fuel. And when we look at the different options we have to try to bring that price down, there's a lot of levers that we have to pull, but none of them are trivial. None of them are easy. But the importance of us being engaged with this community as an example is, in some cases, if you look at the root cost of producing these fuels synthetically, maybe as much as 80% of the final cost actually emanates from the feedstock that you start with.
Wow. 80%.
Yeah, it can be
That's
huge. Now, in some cases, the feedstock can be almost no cost.
Mhm. Okay.
In a case of using municipal solid waste as an example, it actually might be a negative cost. So there it's not contributing to the final fuel product. But with the predominant pathway that's used today, which is hydroprocessing of fats, oils, and greases, that's a case where the feedstock cost is very high with respect to the finished product.
Okay.
So that's our first focus, is on, can we continue to focus on the commercialization of new feedstock sources and conversion processes that continue to bring down price.
Okay.
Most of the other issues that one might normally think about are addressed to a degree because we don't have to make any changes to the airplanes or
Yeah.
the systems or fuel
Right.
distribution. But then the second major issue that we face is, because these fuels are at higher price and the airlines are hesitant to pay a lot more for their jet fuel. And when a producer comes in and puts together his pro forma economic case, and he can't count on having a significant premium on the fuel, then it makes the business case hard to close. Okay.
Mhm.
This is the conundrum that's created, because then when that producer wants to go out to the marketplace and get capitalized, someone looks at his pro forma and says, well, wait a minute, if you lose this policy support, this is no longer profitable. Right.
Right.
And so that uncertainty associated with policy and different funding mechanisms that might be available is the second major challenge that we have on moving to significantly higher levels of production. So the entire industry is working on things like, can we make existing policy mechanisms more significant or of longer duration to help these guys with the profitability of their pro forma, right? If they can come back and say, instead of, oh, I can produce this profitably for 5 years based on policy support, to, oh, now I can cover the tenor of the loan for 15 or 20 years because the policy has been extended or it's more robust, then that's a clear opportunity. So fundamental cost, and then the ripple effect of that cost on being able to actually commercialize new facilities are the two primary things that we're looking at. There's a lot of other nuts and bolts that we're working in the meantime, but those are the key issues.
We could probably get way into the weeds too, but okay, great answers. So in terms of, what SAF production and consumption looks like right now in the US, where are we at?
Yes, going to the heart of the matter. So last year, and there's different ways to look at the production numbers, but one good way to do it, and that anybody can do, is go look at EPA's website, and they can see how many RINs were allocated to SAF production last year. And last year, I think we were, if I'm not mistaken, at 23.6 million gallons of SAF use in the US. Very significant jump from the previous year for sure, nearly doubling capacity, but not quite. But then in January, we took a huge bump. In January alone, went from all of last year at 23.6 to January's use was 9.6 itself in 1 month.
Wow.
So we're expecting a significant increase in total SAF delivery this year. And it's really through the efforts of the 3 existing manufacturers, Montana Renewables, which we heard about this morning a little bit more, World Energy with their Paramount, California facility, and Neste importing fuel precursors through their facility in Texas, and then several more coming online. And that's one of the benefits that I have in this role, is being able to look at that full range of people out there who are interested in meeting the demand from the aviation industry. And this is a shock to some people, but we're working with over 200 companies who are interested in SAF production.
Wow.
I don't expect all of them to deliver at the end of the day, but I work with all of them in some fashion, helping them understand the marketplace, making introductions to different people, helping them get through fuel qualification, lots of those activities. And so I have actually pretty decent line of sight to approximately 2 billion gallons of production by the end of 2028. So that sounds not too bad, right? I'm 2/3 of the way to my 2030 goal.
Yeah.
And I know all of those aren't going to deliver on time. Likely they'll move to the right. But the good news is that there are several entities out there who are working on SAF production who have made no comment at all on what they're doing. It's kind of like the case of Montana Renewables.
It was just one day they were
Last year, I think SAF Magazine, right, was the first one to go interview that team and say, what is it that you're doing? And they're like, oh, yeah, we're working on this SAF project. And whatever, 6 months later, right, they're online producing fuel, producing it at significant amounts. And they're one of those companies. They're now looking at continued retrofits to that facility and looking at a max SAF case to take their SAF production today from 2,000 barrels a day up to something much more significant. So that's the good news.
It is.
There are quite a few of those kinds of companies working quietly in the background.
Without any fanfare, just
exactly. So stay tuned to SAF Magazine, and hopefully you'll hear more about those folks later this year.
Yes. I think that's a good segue into the North American SAF Conference and Expo. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So in the past, every 2 years, CAFFI held a CAFFI conference in Washington, D.C. And about 2 years ago, we recognized that with the expansion that was going on in the industry, the continued proliferation of new pathways, new concepts that people were pursuing with what was just to come out in the SAF Grand Challenge, that we needed to step up our game a little bit. And so last year we did approach BBI about assisting us with the SAF, North American SAF Conference, and they agreed to do that. We held our first activity last year in Minneapolis, and this year we'll be doing it on 10 through 12 September in St. Paul. And you can find out more about that on their website. They're accepting proposals for content there.
Yep.
That'll be a 3-day activity. The first day will be very much like a traditional CAFFI activity. There will be a lot of focus this year on the federal government's role in the SAF Grand Challenge. There will be 3 or 4 major reports that come out here in the next couple of months. Those things will all be highlighted, and there will be discussions about those activities. There's 6 areas of the SAF Grand Challenge. Each of them will be touched on. And then we'll also likely see the announcements out of the FAA with respect to the winners of the Fast SAF program. A couple $100 million that FAA is going to provide in grants to help companies get through some other challenges, allowing them to start producing SAF.
Really looking forward to that. And so if you're interested in learning more about that event, again, which is the North American SAF Conference and Expo, safconference.com, and that is September 11th through the 13th.
Sorry, I said 10 through 12, didn't I? Yeah.
Oh, I don't know.
13, yeah.
I'm pretty sure you got it right, but it's the 11th through the 13th. So Steve, is there anything else that you wanted to add before we wrap it up?
So I think that's, the focus that we're working on is execution of the SAF Grand Challenge. And if you want to know more about that, you can feel free to touch base with CAFFI, CAFFI.org, or there's a lot of opportunities that are coming out right now. I think right now, today, there are 6 open opportunities with the Department of Energy and at least 2 with USDA for people to go after funding opportunities for different aspects of working in this space. But CAFFI is just going to continue to work at the grassroots level in conferences like this, helping people understand what is SAF, what are you guys doing, how is it made, is there an opportunity for my feedstock or my process or my industry association to engage with you? And chances are the answer to every one of those questions is yes. So we'd encourage folks to reach out to us and understand how they might play in the SAF space. It's very broad and broadening. And we've got some significant challenges in front of us, so we appreciate everyone's help.
Well, Steve, thank you so much for the podcast. It's really been great chatting.
Same here. Appreciate you having me.
Absolutely. And if you're watching, thanks so much for tuning in to the Biomass Magazine podcast. We'll see you later.
Take care.